Hello, Namaskar. Welcome to my pod, the CAA Show. CAA, as all of you know, is Conversations and Analysis. My name is Juggi Bhasin. To become a subscriber, all you have to do is to press that red button on your screen. Subscription is, of course, completely free. Would also really appreciate if you could like this video and share this video with your friends. People come and go. We are born, we die. That's a fact of life. And the newspapers are full every day of people, famous people who die. Their obituaries are there. You can read them or you might not read them. Sometimes you glance through them. Sometimes you don't even bother. But somebody like Robert Redford, when he dies, I can't speak for the others, but I can speak for myself. It does bring a lump in your throat. It makes you deeply emotional. And that got me thinking, why was I so emotional thinking about Robert Redford? What did he represent that made me so emotional? I mean, there are great actors, there are actors who leave their indelible mark with their screen presence and by their acting abilities. But he had something else. He had an X factor which transcended all that. He had what I call a universal appeal about him. And me, as an Indian, I don't think so he's ever spoken about India or his desire to go to India or anything of that sort. That's not the reason. But there's something very universally appealing about him. And when people today are trying to categorize him as this left, liberal, wokeist kind of person, there are people who are trying to do that. I think they're doing a disservice to the man. There was something much, much more beyond about Robert Redford. Certainly, he was an environmentalist. He was an LGBTQ supporter. He, of course, started, as we all know, that famous Sundance Film Festival in Utah, which was, again, an independent filmmaking, which encouraged independent filmmaking. He's done all that. But despite that, I'm arguing in this podcast that Robert Redford actually represented something completely else, something different. He represented an America of a bygone era, an America which was, to start with, beautiful, an America which was compassionate, an America which was empathetic, an America which was a defender of the truth. Robert Redford represented all that. America, which was exciting also, adventurous also, all that. Robert Redford represented all that. He was not merely some wokeist, as some people are trying to portray him. He was certainly not that. And I will try and show to you, or prove to you rather, in this podcast, that he was actually a kind of a centrist, for want of a better term, or that he was a person somewhere in the, in the center of things. He didn't swing, certainly not on the right, but he certainly was not there on the left also. His work, the characters he played, his political leanings, but more than all that, what he represented on the screen was middle of the road, centrist, empathetic, compassionate, beautiful, very exciting America. He was all that. Okay, but before I talk about all that in my podcast, let me give you my own personal two or three scenes which have always stood out for me from his repertoire, from his body of work. It has to be the number one scene which has stood out for me, obviously, is the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The last scene when these two are, I don't know how many bullets they have taken when they are holed up in that shed. And there is the entire, I think, the Bolivian army is literally outside waiting to gun them down. And they are bleeding from all corners. And Robert Redford, Paul Newman, portraying Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, they're cracking jokes. They're cracking jokes about what's going to happen when they go out. I mean, it is gallows humor, obviously, but it is brilliant. And then that last scene, when they hold hands and they just take out their guns and they go out. One of the most memorable scene in cinematic history. Then The Sting. Conman extraordinary, Robert Redford, along with Paul Newman. you have to see his face, the look, the expressions on his face when they are either conning or they're getting conned. The scene with the woman, when I think it was Robert Redford, Paul Newman is, I'm forgetting which one of them is coming to this woman, and the other guy shoots that woman, because she was going to kill him. The sting. Um, and that scene, which I can never forget, is Out of Africa scene when Robert Redford is with Meryl Streep, and there is a line which charges for both of them, and he's a big game hunter in the movie, and then he very calmly picks up his shotgun, and the lion is almost upon them, and he shoots him in the head. I mean, these are scenes you can never forget. But there are so many others. But these are some of my own personal favorites. But let's come to the topic at hand of why I wanted to do this podcast about Robert Redford is because to my mind we are doing a disservice to the man and the legend when we are categorizing him as merely liberal, woke, and all that, giving him modern definitions which he was not. Let me go point by point of what Robert Redford really represented and why I say that. I'm saying that, in my opinion, Robert Redford represented common sense in the world. He represented the first big reason why we actually go to watch movies in the first place. And in case we have forgotten, I want to reiterate that we go and watch movies not for didactic purposes. Didactic means with an intention to teach, because that is what has become the new mantra of wokeist culture. Intention to teach. History is about repression. History is about correcting the wrongs of the past, and you have to be these righteous characters all the time. Certain communities, like the black community, has always been suffering, so you have to portray all that. Wokeist culture, Robert Redford didn't represent any of that. I promise you about that. He represented common sense cinema, relatable cinema, cinema which you could identify, which you could enjoy. You could eat your popcorn, you could have your Pepsi or your Coke, and you could have a fantastic 2 hours time watching the movies. All wide-eyed. That is what Robert Redford really represented. Which means, starting with number one, that you went to the movies because in the movies, I think, and it's something which is almost becoming like, it's illiberal to say this. People don't even talk about it now. But you go to the movies actually because you want at least the lead pair to actually look like movie stars. Okay, and Robert Redford looks like a movie star. He was a very good looking man. Let's acknowledge that. Today nobody wants to talk about looks and all that, but looks mattered in the movies. I think they still matter in the movies, but we don't want to acknowledge that. In the age of realism and all that, we don't talk about that, but we should, because he looked like he was a brilliant, he was a great looking guy, blonde, blue eyes and all that. Uh, Tremendous looks, talent. He was, besides looks, he was a very talented actor. He was a very good director also. We know he won the Academy Award. So the two most important things which I think which movies or the cinema or that magic which cinema is all about is made up of looks and talent. He had both of them in abundance. And then the third big thing, casting. He has done roles which are certainly not wokeist by any stretch of the imagination. They are outstanding roles, different roles, each from the other. In Butch Cassidy, he played a gunman, a robber gunman. They do a lot of killings, actually. So, in a certain kind of a modern day Robin Hood, you could call that kind of a person. In The Sting, he's a con man. All the President Men's an intrepid reporter. In I think the movie with Demi Moore, Indecent Proposal, he plays this very rich man who gives an absolutely crazy sum of money to the husband to sleep one night with his wife. And then he played this playboy of the Western world in The Great Gatsby. I mean, every character different from the other, very different, relatable, if not even relatable, fascinating characters, but certainly not wokeist characters. So, looks, talent, casting. I mean, that is what Robert Redford in the first place represented. Okay. Number two, we today live in an age where diktats are given by the academy. I'm talking of the Hollywood, the Academy of Science and Arts, that in films you must include, there has to be a minority element, there has to be a black element, there has to be some LGBTQ element. Otherwise, they will never not be considered for awards. They will not, in some places, they might not even be screened. We have come to that point. But that is not what Robert Redford represented. Um, if today in the last so many decades we have started saying black is beautiful, and I do believe black is beautiful, then by the same stretch white can also be beautiful, brown can also be beautiful, and this is what Robert Redford showed. He was, as I said, a great looking man. Look at his face, before Brad Pitt today is, of course, the Robert Redford of our times in a certain sense. But before Brad Pitt, there was, and before Tom Cruise, great looking actors, there was Robert Redford. So looks did matter. And even though there are so many reports that he tried to kind of tone down this entire emphasis on his looks, but he could not escape it because, look, you're born with them. You are a movie star. You look like a movie star. He had that. He had that. Those that the looks and that appeal. So if we celebrate black is beautiful, let's celebrate sometimes brown is also beautiful. White can also be beautiful. And looks do matter in cinema. That was very, very important thing. And then along with that comes a very important point about what do you represent in terms of a cultural and a political culture, because yes, those are important things, but let's talk a little bit about that. And this entire, as I said, I'm saying this again and again in this podcast, he did not represent left liberal activism in that particular sense. Despite the fact that he had Sundance, despite the fact it was an independent filmmaking endeavor. Let's start with the Sundance Film Festival. Who was Sundance, by the way, in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid? Sundance was a robber gunman, a person who kills, who robs banks. That is what Sundance was. And the Sundance Film Festival in real life, where they were set up in Utah, is named after that particular Sundance. So it is not named after some black revolutionary, wokeist ideal hero or something. It's named after Sundance, which should tell you that maybe in his consciousness, Robert Redford knew what all this was all about. Today, all these debates which we keep happening between the right and the left and the wokeist and all that, he was certainly not right. I agree with that. But he was certainly not this also. Then look at the range of characters which he has played. All his characters. None of them are these cliched, these hard nosed, revolutionary types, leftist kind of characters. These are real characters, relatable characters. Their stories are fascinating. They are varied. They are different from each other. Not this stereotypical kind of vocus characters which we see so often in cinema again and again. But above all, I think in a certain sense, why do I say that Robert Redford's passing away marks the going away of the idea that was America? Because that America, which I'm talking about, was this beautiful America, empathetic America, an America we all aspired to look at because we took our cultural cues from that kind of America, compassionate but centrist, neither particularly right, neither particularly left, but somewhere in the middle, with compassion, but at the same time, appreciative of looks, appreciative of talents. This is what centrist America was all about, which I think Robert Redford brilliantly he represented. And again, as I'm saying that, oh, look at all his characters. And as I said, even though in his real life he did not give much emphasis to looks and all that, but the fact is that each of these characters, they were different from each other. As I said, the conman, the gunman, the big game hunter, the fearless reporter, these are by no stretch of the imagination woke characters which we find today. Today we live in a age, for instance, where on Netflix you show a series which is on the Egyptians, and then you bring in a black heroine because you want to kind of culturally neutralize, or you want to give a statement, and the Egyptians are very upset with that entire thing. You make a wonderful series called A Gentleman in Moscow, which is a brilliant series, I thought. But what do you do in that? It is set in Tsarist Russia, and in Tsarist Russia, you are showing black characters in the movie. How can there be black characters in the movie during that time? So, this kind of miscasting, this kind of deference, we have to, for the heck of it, we have to show blacks, we have to show browns, we have to show whatever, we have to show minorities. This kind of nonsense was not there during the Robert Redford years. And that is why I'm saying, when people say that, oh, that was the white era, the whites were, they ruled the roost, we never got a chance. That might be true. I'm not disputing that. But the fact of the matter is that if in a cultural milieu, if it only calls for whites, or if the blacks are needed, then you bring in the blacks, that is the right thing to do. What's wrong with that? So Robert Redford exemplified that particular era. And let's not forget all these things when we pay our tributes to the man, when we analyze his body of work, when we see for what he really was. We keep talking about his environmentalism, about his LGBTQ, and about his Sundance Film Festival. Absolutely correct. We should also. But let's not forget what made what Robert Redford was all about. It was the face. It was literally the face that launched, that swooned a million hearts all over the world, I would say. Men, women alike. Men aspired to look like Robert Redford. They wanted to have that swagger, that kind of handsomeness, which Robert. Handsomeness, by the way, was not something to be looked down upon during that time, which is now looked down upon. Today, the shabbier you are, the more earthy you are, the more realistic you are. That is supposed to be the only kind of realistic or good acting. I don't agree with that. Stars are stars. Stars need to look like stars. There is room for everyone. There's room for everything, I would say. But why take away that star element? This is what actors like Robert Redford, Paul Newman, Steve McGraw, all these greats, they all typified that there was something unique in the way, in terms of their looks, in terms of their acting abilities, in terms of their representation of so many different kind of characters. That is what really made movies worth seeing. Today we don't feel like seeing all these movies, all these wokeist movies which are coming on all these OTT platforms. They exactly look similar. They exactly with the same kind of political correctness which is there in every scene, in the storyline, in the direction of the film, and it's awful viewing at times. So that's why I'm saying it's an era which has gone away. I don't want this era to go. I still want to watch movies which fascinate me, but unfortunately, none of those movies are being made today. That is unfortunately the tragedy of cinema today, because the wokeists have now taken over control. They control the levers of power. And therefore, yes, at one level, we pay tributes to the passing away of the great Robert Redford. But do we even understand his real legacy? That is the question we need to be asking in these so-called culturally wokeist time, where we don't even understand the great legacy of all these greats. That is what we need to understand, and probably revive that kind of movie making, the movie magic, because that can only come with star appeal. There's no other way for the movies to keep getting the audiences back in the theaters. And so, on this note, I come to the end of this podcast. I hope you really liked it. You liked the show. Do subscribe to it. On this note, it's goodbye and cheers from my end.